good friend and pal, Noyjeetut here. Gonna give you a book review. Give you a book review. Oh goody. So back in the 90s, you really didn't know much about prison life. This is way before Oz or even Prison Break, so I really didn't have much to go on. And I was at the thrift store one day, and I was like, "Can you buy this for me, Mama?" And I tried to, I just opened it up and showed the price, because I didn't want her to see the front of it, which is, you see, the Hot House, Life in Leavenworth Prison by Pete Early. And, you see the front of it, you see a bunch of mug shots, and it looks bad. And, it's a kind of a more adult-natured book. But, I just showed her the price, and you see, it was $2.98, marked down to $1.98. And, you see the little, someone put a little cross to the $2.98. Whatever. Thrift stores are, Goodwills, thrift stores, they're all crazy. It's just insanity. But anyway, I got the book. I was able to look at the book because it was so cheap. It was so cheap, and it was one of those "this will keep me busy for a while" ideas, I think, on her part. I love the book. This is one of the first books I read ever. I'm trying to remember if it was the Mick Foley book or this book. It's hard for me to get a timeline going. It may have been this book, because I think I had this one book first, the middle 90s or whatever. So yeah, pretty much the book's about, it covers a bunch of prisoners. I think it's 5 in all. Some of them are on this front cover, actually. This is Dallas Scott, one of the founding members of the Iranian Brotherhood. That's Thomas Little, newcomer to the prison system, accidentally put into a maximum security prison when his crimes don't indicate such. Carl Bowles, I think he's killed 3 people, including an old couple who he stole their vehicle. Ended up killing them because they knew too much. Thomas Silverstein, right here. Thomas Silverstein's an interesting character. He actually never killed anyone until he got into prison. And I find that dynamic very interesting. And actually, the first one he was accused of, he actually didn't do. So it gave him a more career in prison and long sentence to where he ended up really killing people. It's one of those downward spiral things where someone who did do bad, he did rob banks, but he never killed anybody. You just see that fast slope. That picture on the front here is Norman Bucklew. Norman Bucklew, I guess it's 6 in all, 6 prisoners. Norman Bucklew is a ladies' man and worked in the cafeteria. He escaped prison. And William Post, who's like this scruffy, like hermit guy who raises cats in the Hot House. I hear it's not really actually called the Hot House, but Pete Early thought it sounded good, and really is one of the only complaints someone had of a review I read about this book before I read it again. And I thought, well, if that's all you have, just a title to go on, you really don't have much to complain about. So what they do is they just talk about those stories. There's also, I almost forgot, Warden Matthews. He's a black new warden. And he's coming into Kansas, which has a lot of racial undertones going on at the time. Just because, I don't know, it's the 80s. This whole book's written with the 80s. It wasn't too long ago. The 80s. This book was written between 1987, 1989, a good 2-year span, and it's an interesting book. I really like it. It really captures the everyday troubles and problems of prisoners, and also of those trying to keep prisoners prisoned. The best story in there to me is Carl Bowles and Thomas Little. Thomas Little's a new guy in prison. He was told by a fellow inmate on the way to the prison to hook up with Carl, and he'll take care of him. And Carl is someone that the prison deems a predator throughout the book. And it's interesting, the two of them claim they never had any kind of sexual action going on in the prison, while everyone else in the whole book says they've had sexual action going on because Carl took care of him. And normally people don't take care of you in the kindness of their own heart. But what's interesting is, in the end, spoiler alert, Carl actually helps Thomas Little relocate to a much less security prison because he was on doped up charges about him trying to escape when actually his cellmate was escaping. So, I mean, if I'm in prison and I got me a prison bitch, right? Let's follow this logic. I'm in prison, I got me a sweet little prison bitch. Look at that one. Oh yeah, he can pucker it up real nice. That's a cutie right there. And so I got my prison bitch. The last thing I want to do is help my prison bitch escape to another prison on less charges. It's just me. I don't know. So I tend to believe him. Some people would call me crazy, but I don't believe their relationship was sexual. I think it was a friendship. Carl Bowles goes into great detail about how if he really wanted sex in prison, there are people within the prison that work at the prison are willing to give it to him, and there are people, of course, prisoners. They're willing to give him any kind of sex he wants, anytime, because he's a bad mofo. The other big storyline is, of course, Warden Matthews trying to find acceptance within the prison system. Real nice guy, seems like, but he just seems like he's particular. And sometimes the book seems like it focused too much on his dilemmas because his stuff doesn't seem as serious or as concentrated as some of the prisoners' stuff that they're going through. And I really wish they spread it out more. Just my 2 cents there. Thomas Silverstein, his big thing is he is just isolated from society totally because he killed a guard. After he robbed a bank, he goes to jail, he gets in this situation where other people testify that he killed someone within prison, which drums up his charges and makes his stay much longer, his sentence much longer in prison, when actually he never killed that guy. Not at all. But once you have that sentence against you and it starts piling on and the years start adding up, you seem to just kind of delve into that prison life. And later he kills a guard who he claimed was picking on him. And that got him sent to just a room. A cage within the cage with a room that's just always on with lights. Always. So the most important thing to him to have in prison is actually having his painting supplies. And you get to go to his journey to try to get his painting supplies back in his hands. Also, all the prisoners recall their childhood to help give a picture of the type of road you have to take to end up in a prison. And a lot of it's really sad. It makes you on their side. But I like how the book balances itself. Like, it'll give you this really heartwarming story about how, you know, they were able to rehabilitate a fellow prisoner or a woman before they went to prison. But then they also have this real dark story about how, you know, they want to stab a guard or how they want to get someone to be a mule for them to smuggle in the bullets and the gun so they could shoot a guard and make a break for it, or just so they could kill a guard. It's just really, it really keeps it really even, where you almost feel enough sympathy for someone to say, hey, why not, you know, let's start a petition to get this guy released. And it's like, oh yeah, he did that shit. That's pretty fucked up. Never mind. Cancel the meeting. I'm not going to bat for that guy. He did some bad shit. Changed my mind. But it's interesting. I really like it. I really like this book. Let's see, what are the other storylines in there? William Post's storyline isn't really, it's just William Post is in there and he talks about his girlfriends, and he actually was having a relationship with someone that was within the prison system, some secretary or something. He's kind of a ladies' man, even though he looks scruffy as hell. That's kind of cool. He tries to get married to this one girl, and he actually does get married, and they recall the story, but how he saw that it didn't affect his parole board at all, and he didn't get out, so he pretty much ended the marriage afterwards. But it was funny because he spent so much time for this marriage. I mean, he claimed these 2 girls that were not his daughters as his own, and on the visits he was all friendly and stuff. He just went through all these hoops to make it look like he was ready to come out. And you know, right afterwards, after he gets passed up to be let out in any kind of sense of the word, he breaks it off and gets divorced from this lady who's relocated her whole life to be around this guy in his prison visits, which is it's really sad. The kind of people that get caught up within prison life, and they're not even in prison. They're just associated with all these prisoners. It's heartbreaking, some of the stories in here about that. Dallas Scott's interesting. He's fighting his trial. He's not a lawyer. He's a Texan. He's pretty redneck. He's racist, and it's just funny following his line of thought and just how he's trying to get out there, and he just doors keep on getting shut in his face, and rightfully so. I mean, he's probably did the bank robbery, but there's some little things they left out of evidence and stuff that leaves the loophole open for him to try to, retrial his case. And it's interesting to watch him go through the loops and get a lot of denial letters in the process, but he finally gets a chance, like where they'll retrial the case, but then he's caught with smuggling heroin through a phone call he was making to someone, saying, all you gotta do is do this and get in here and get me the heroin, and your husband gets to live, honey. Otherwise, and it's like, oh, he almost had something going for him, and then he kind of kills it right there. But they're interesting stories. I thought I'd read some passages that really just hit me like a lightning bolt. Also, what I didn't talk about a lot in this book is they do cover a lot of the staff, but I just don't find those stories as interesting. It seems like the staff just really hate all the prisoners, and I understand a lot of that, but it just seems like they don't really have opinions. They just have this formed group think about anybody that's in prison, and it just kind of, I wish they would look at them as individuals and not as just as a group of prisoners sometimes. But yeah, let's see some passages here. Alright, here's a good little story about William Post, the Catman as he's called. Post had dealt with parole boards several times. He knew his long criminal past was going to be difficult to overcome, but he had been gathering newspaper clippings about other criminals who had been successful at getting paroles. He found the stories encouraging. The case of Lawrence Singleton had caught his attention. Convicted in 1978 of raping a 15-year-old hitchhiker, hacking off her arms with an axe, and leaving her for dead along a rural California road, Singleton had been paroled after serving 9 years. If a guy like that can get a parole after 9 years, and I can't get one for a simple bank robbery after serving 15 years, then I got to wonder, what kind of message are they trying to send me? Post said. Does that mean I'm worse than Lawrence Singleton? If the parole board makes me stay here for 25 years, are they telling me I'm twice as bad as a guy like him? Twice as bad? And if that's the case, what am I allowed to do? Am I missing out on not taking advantage? The next time I rob a bank, Post continued, why not rape the teller or shoot everyone? Since society already has said to me that I am twice as bad as someone who rapes a little kid and chops off her arms. That's fucked up shit right there. That's pretty fucked up. And I'm not saying he's right. I'm saying that guy should have been in prison for life for raping a hitchhiker and chopping off her arms. Just the legal system, and it pisses you off sometimes. It's like when I try to watch some of those police shows. It's like, this guy's raped the same girl 25 times and is paroled out each time. And like, here's the twist, right? He gets like within, 18 feet of her. And she shoots him with a gun for protection, she says. But really, her restraining order against him was only for 17 feet. She broke the law. Now she has to pay. You're going to jail, honey. Going to jail. It's that kind of lack of common sense. It's really messing everything up. Let's do another one. Between some of the chapters, they got these great little voices, just quotes from different prisoners or different people within the prison wardens and whatnot, lieutenants. And this one I love. This one's really funny. Voice of a bank robber, age 45. They originally charged me with murder, kidnapping, and bank robbery. But I'm really just a bank robber with really bad luck. You see, my buddy and me were robbing this bank. And when we come outside, there's a cop waiting across the street, and he starts shooting. He shoots my buddy, but I don't know he's dead, so I pull him into the car and drive away. When they bust me, they charge me with murder, kidnapping, and the robbery. I asked my attorney, how the hell can they do that? All I did was rob a bank. He says the law says if you are committing a felony and someone dies, a bank teller has a heart attack or something, you can be charged with murder. He tells me they charged me with murder because my buddy got killed. He says the law says when I pulled my buddy into the car and drove off, I kidnapped him because I was taking the body from the scene of the crime. That's how they got me for kidnapping. He says that the law says that I can be charged with all three even though I didn't kill nobody and I ain't kidnapped nobody. I say the law sucks. That seems like, that's just great. That's really, just shows you what we're dealing with. Just so messed up. Really. I'm not condoning bank robberies. I mean, that's messed up too. You shouldn't be robbing the bank. And it seems like everyone in here is robbing the bank. At least the people he seems to associate with. And I understand that you don't want to associate with as many rapists and murderers as you do the bank robbers. They kind of have a better image going for them. This story is about Thomas Silverstein's childhood. One afternoon, a bully named Gary knocked Silverstein down as he was walking home from school. The next day, Virginia Silverstein was watching when Gary came past her house. She grabbed the bully by his shirt and marched him and her son into the backyard of her home. "Hit him," she ordered her son. "You hit this boy as hard as you can or I'll take my belt to you." I took one look at my mom and her black belt, and I took one look at Gary, and there wasn't any choice at all, Silverstein recalled. I smacked him in the face as hard as I could. The next day when Silverstein left school, Gary's father was waiting. He escorted the boy to Gary's backyard. "Hit him, Gary," the man ordered. "Punch him in the face like he hit you." But it seems that Gary, still recovering from yesterday's battle, was in no mood to fight. His old man started yelling at him, and I broke loose and ran home and told my mom what had happened. Silverstein said, "She jumped in the car and drove over there and started yelling at this guy to come out of his house, but he was afraid to come to the front door. So my mom pulled these bricks from the flower bed in their front lawn and she threw them through their front window. Then she went home and called the cops and told them she wanted the guy arrested for kidnapping." So that gives you some insight on the childhood of career criminals. Just unbelievable stuff. It just stuff like this just sticks with you, and it helps you really look at signs and stuff of abuse early on in some child's life. If you're able to run across them and see it firsthand like this, you can really tell there's going to be problems down the road, and maybe even get involved and stop it from the start. This is the voice of Lieutenant Bill Kindig. And like I said, these little voice segments are between chapters and stuff. People who aren't in the book at all, just give them a little place to have their say if they have a really good quote. This is him recalling the July 31st, 1973 riot at Leavenworth, in which Officer Wayne L. Sell was murdered by inmates. "I was the first person to reach Sell. I lifted him up, and when I did, my arm squeezed some of the air out of his chest, and he made a groaning sound. I thought he was still alive, and I started talking to him and yelling to the other officers to help me. When I realized he was dead, I figured he died in my arms, and it really bothered me. I kept wondering if there wasn't something I should have done to save his life. I had nightmares about it later. You know, me coming up to him, grabbing him being alive, and then dying in my arms. I couldn't sleep because I kept seeing his face. They could have killed any one of us. They didn't have anything against Sal. He was just there, so they stabbed him. The prison doctor told me he had been hit so many times there wasn't anything I could have done, and that made me feel better, but I still couldn't shake the image of his face. I had his blood on my pants, and the next day when I got up, I wore those bloody pants even though my wife told me I shouldn't wear them. I walked right into the visiting room wearing those bloody pants, and no one said a word to me all day about how I shouldn't have worn them. I had to wear them. Wayne Sell was a good and decent guy, and he was dead. They had killed him, and the next day it was like everything was back to normal, like nothing even happened the day before. That made me angry, damn it. Something had happened. A man had been stabbed to death for no reason. He had died, and now everyone was acting like nothing even happened. The inmates in the visiting room were laughing and talking to their visitors, and the other officers were going about their jobs, and no one was saying anything. That's why I wore those pants. I wanted people to know that I knew Sell had died, and that everything wasn't normal, and that Sell's death had meant something. It wasn't something I was going to forget. When they began remodeling his cell house, I went in there just to see what it looked like. You know, after they had gutted it and torn out all the tiers and cells. And suddenly I found myself going to where I had found Sell's body. This is about 15 years later, and yet I could still see his face, and I started to hyperventilate. And I got so bad that they had to get me the hell out of there. His face was as clear to me that day as it was when I found his body. Even now I can still see Sell's face, and I still get mad because, you know, there is no reason for him to kill him. No reason at all. That gives me shivers every time. It's so strong. It's just so real and so strong. I love that. I love that passage, that whole passage. Lieutenant Bill Kindig. Really good. Really. Whew. It's one of those things that hits you, just hits you, and it should hit you. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. If it doesn't hit you, I'm kind of worried. Here's some close-up pictures just in the middle of the book of some of the guys. This is William Post right here, as you can see. Silverstein and Carl and Little. And here's Warden Matthews. Some other guys who are talked about that book. And one interesting one. This is a picture that Silverstein, I don't know if it's Silverstein or Silverstein. I think it's Silverstein. I think that's how you pronounce that. Drew once he got his art supplies back. It's a really cool drawing. I really like that. It's just like the darkness that still has a hold of him. Still has him captured. This is kind of neat because it actually contains some history. Let's see. In 1987, summer slipped quickly into fall at the hothouse. The weeks passing without incident until Friday, November 20th. Shortly after 9 a.m., Associate Warden Richard Smith got a telephone call from the Bureau's regional headquarters. Within seconds, he knew there was going to be trouble, big trouble, from an unlikely source. Fidel Castro had just agreed to take back as many 3,000 Cubans who were now sitting in federal prisons. These were Cubans who had sought political asylum in the United States in 1980 during the Mariel boat lift, but had not qualified because they were either criminals or mentally ill. Getting rid of them after nearly 8 years was great news to Smith, but when he was told that the State Department planned to announce their impending deportation at noon that same day, Smith was appalled. Cuban inmates would be enraged by the announcement. A few of them at the hothouse had told Smith that they would butcher a guard if necessary to keep from being sent back. They knew that such a murder would result in their spending their lives in prison, but it would be an American prison, not a Cuban one, and that was worth killing for. The so-called Cuban Problem had actually begun in the spring of 1980, when thousands of Cubans swarmed the Peruvian embassy in Havana, seeking to escape Cuba's crumbling economy. A furious Fidel Castro announced that any Cubans who wanted to desert their homeland could, but only if they left through a tiny port of Mariel. No Central American country would accept the refugees. However, there was no place for them to go until then Jimmy Carter, president, announced that the United States would become the Cuban refugees would welcome welcome the Cuban refugees with open arms and an open heart. Virtually overnight, 125,000 Cubans made the 19-mile journey from Mariel to the Florida ports, where they completely overwhelmed the immigration agents. To make matters worse, Castro thumbed his nose at the U.S. during the height of the boat lift by emptying his country's prisons and mental hospitals into Mariel. Months later, the Immigration and Naturalization Service would calculate that Castro had released 23,000 undesirables, yet federal agents were only able to stop 210 of them at Florida ports. Many of the others were arrested during the months that followed and were turned over to the INS for deportation, but Castro refused to take them back, so the INS had no choice but to house them in makeshift detention camps. I never really knew much about all this, but they actually rioted pretty bad in Louisiana and in Atlanta, and they had to be sent to Kansas, a bunch of the Cubans, once they were able to take back over the prisons. It's just crazy. It's just madness. Madness, I tell you. Fidel Castro really threw some wrenches back then. Lots of wrenches. Here's Norman Bucklew. That's not his real name. They just had to change it to protect him in prison. Childhood story he had I love this story. When I was little, maybe 4 or 5, Bucklew said, as he cleaned the tables, he was a cafeteria worker and also a cook at the prison, I would wait at the door for Pops to come home. I had my cowboy hat on, my boots on, and my gun on. And he'd come in and I'd give him a gun, and this guy would say, "Draw, now." Obviously a 25-year-old or 26-year-old man is going to beat this 5-year-old kid to the draw. But what, you gotta turn the page, amazed me was that every day, every single day, when he beat me to the draw, he made me put my hands up and turn around and face the wall. Then he would shoot me in the back. Every fucking day we do this. And one day, I reared up on him and I said, "What's the sense of facing the wall? You're going to shoot me anyway." And he says, "Well, maybe today I won't." So I turned around and he shot me in the back, and he did that every day after that. Never once did he not shoot me. I thought about it a long time, Bucklew said, and finally I decided there was a message there. When he came home from work, I shouldn't have been waiting for him. I should have been hiding behind the door or behind the couch. I should have shot him as soon as he came in. Fuck giving him a gun and fuck giving him a chance. You see, I think Pops was trying to teach me something in life. You can play by someone else's rules, or you can play by your own. And if you play by someone else's rules, you're going to get fucked every time, because they were designed for them, not you. Yeah, that's what old Pops was saying. And it may sound like a stupid point, but I think he was right. Just, woo, just mind blown. Dallas Scott actually has a really funny story, a whole segment in here, and I won't include it all because it's just like a series of unfortunate events just happen once over again and again and again, where he's outside in the real world again, and he's just running into all these trouble from a lot of people who would never give him trouble in prison. So that sets up pretty much him summing up the whole thing. Scott saw a certain irony to his story. I can walk into any prison in this country, any prison, and know immediately what's happening. I can deal with this crazy prison environment with the so-called worst of the worst convicts and Marin and the so-called prison predators and all that baloney, he explained. But in the outside world, I'm always getting tripped up. Every time I mess with a square John, I end up getting fucked because you people have no concept of jailhouse respect and absolutely no honor. Take that woman in Dallas at the airport. In prison, she wouldn't have dared talk to me like she did, because I would have grabbed her by the neck and demanded a price for such shitty treatment. But I knew I couldn't do that in your world. You just can't go around out there and grab every fool by the neck when they do something stupid. You see, he continued, in there, I know how to play all the games and play them well. But out on the streets, the deck always seemed to be stacked against me. A few weeks later, Scott was taken from Leavenworth Hole to Marin, the toughest prison ever. Thanks for watching all this. Great book. Check it out. My only complaint is I feel like the first half of the book is much better than the second half. If I had to rate it, I'd say the first half is a perfect 10, where the second half seems like an 8. It just seems like an 8 because it's more about the people working within the prison industry. And there's one chapter I would have kept out of there where the warden is worried about a visit from the big higher up or whatever, and it doesn't show because of a rainstorm or something. It just didn't need to be there because the warden's character was always already set up as a neat freak and someone who was trying to work with the prisoners and really believed in rehabilitation, but they didn't need that at all. But what's really good about the last part, though, is it really puts some conclusions on all these stories. So that's the good part about the last part. I felt like there was more on the prisoners, talking about them in the first half, and that was way, way more interesting. But yeah, really good book. Check it out. I don't know, it's probably online by today's dates. I don't know. I have it in physical life here, so I don't need to look. But if you really need to look for it, The Hot House: Life Inside Leavenworth Prison by Pete Early. Check it out. I'll see you guys later. Hopefully none of y'all are watching this from prison, because that would suck. It would really suck. And hopefully if you're watching this from prison, hopefully you're not a bitch. Or yeah, just not a bitch is pretty good. Or not a snitch. Not a bitch or a snitch. It's usually they kind of cross over. It's a tricky diagram actually to draw that up. I'll see you next week. I'll see you tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow.